All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Horological Society of New York November meeting. My name is Nicholas Manousis, and I'm really happy to see such a big crowd out here tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. So as usual, let's start with a couple announcements. Quick education update. We're going to be traveling. We've got a class coming up in Miami, Florida, January 11th, hosted by our friends at F.B.H.I. And I'm very excited to announce that we're going to be traveling all the way to Australia for Melbourne, Australia, February 29th through March 1st, that weekend. And we'll be hosted by our friends at the Hourglass. So really looking forward to that trip. If you have any friends down under in Australia, let them know we're coming their way very soon. And of course, we have our evening classes here up on the 5th floor throughout all of November. And we have one special weekend class coming up on November 9th here in New York. So if you're looking for one of the more intensive 4-hour courses, we've got one of those scheduled coming up soon. And it seems like it's a long way away, but it's really not. We're actually already starting on the planning work and the organization work for the annual gala and charity auction. So you're going to hear this from me now all the way through next year, reminding you to save the date. So the 154th anniversary gala and charity auction for the Horological Society of New York is coming up April 1st, 2020. And I also want to take this opportunity to announce, to let everyone know, we are now accepting donations for the charity auction. So if you have any old interesting, fascinating horological ephemera, timekeepers, watches, clocks, and you're interested in having them featured at the charity auction, we'd be very interested in speaking with you, so let us know. April 1st, 2020 is an easy date to remember, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you there. Yes. Okay, tonight's lecture. So the question for tonight is, what does it mean to be an independent horologist? I'm sure I could ask the audience, and everyone would come up with a different question. But there's one thing that I think that we all can agree on, and that it's something that's not easy to do at all. And that's why I'm so excited about tonight's lecture and about what our speaker for tonight is going to relate to us. So our speaker for the evening is a fellow of the British Horological Institute, and he's a liveryman of the Worshipful company of Clockmakers. And he's joining us tonight. He traveled all the way from Santa Barbara, California to be here with us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Mr. David Walter.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. It's an honor and a privilege, and something I've wanted to do for a long time. I hope some of you have heard of me. I'm not completely hidden in Santa Barbara. And so the life of as an independent horologist. I'd like to think mine is a little bit different to most, mostly because, as you know, I was born in Perth in Western Australia. I'll change that to some more a collage of what I've done. And trust me, it's a long way from Perth, Western Australia to anywhere. For those who are not sure, the closest city is not Sydney, it's Jakarta, Indonesia. And that's a long way. So this is an interesting opening picture, but let me go past it. I like to start off a lecture with this. The risk is not that you set your goals too high and fail to reach them, but you set them too low and do. And I think that's something really important. I don't remember who this is attributed to. If anyone knows, I'd be happy to find out. But I'd been told at times, like, you've got your head in the clouds, get down, just get a nice job, buy a nice little home in the suburbs and have 2.1 kids and 3.2 cars. And I thought, I don't want to do that. It's not very interesting. There's more in the world than that, and there's more in horology. Background, excuse me, I need to put my glasses on to read. And this is not unusual. Age 15, I left school. And this is not particularly unusual in Australia at the time. The normal course was you went to school to 15 and then found a job as an apprenticeship in some kind of a trade. And my father was a saddler. So he'd always had an idea in mind that a good job and good training was good. And as he told me once, if you have a trade and you know what you're doing, you can go to work anywhere in the world and find work if you have a skill. And I thought that was a pretty good arrangement. And as an apprentice, the first time I went into work, I was given some kind of very unpleasant alarm clock, probably a Westclox to take apart, which I sort of did and cut my fingers on one of the wheels because I never let the spring down, and went on from there. From then, we started off in clocks, just cheap clocks, whatever came in. And I worked for a very small business. There was father and son, workshop upstairs, a tiny shop downstairs in an arcade. And any job that came into the store was a cuckoo clock, a Timex, a Rolex, never saw a Patek, Omega, whatever came in next was your next job. So there was a great versatility. And part of this great versatility of that has paid off to me, and I didn't realize it for a long time. And because Perth was so isolated, getting spare parts was always a major difficulty. Getting something from the States for a Hamilton took 6 months. Getting something from England or Switzerland was only 3 months. If you wanted something from Sydney or Melbourne, heck, that was breeze at maybe 3 weeks. So customers all understood this because we're all equally isolated. So they come, is there some way you can fix it? So if something that you needed, a stem, a balance staff, something else that was needed, well, we just had to make it. And it was just, I understood that this is what we did, but this has allowed me great versatility in later life of seeing a job come in, or even on my own making, of like, that can be done. I'm not sure how I can do it, but I'll figure it out. And I've always reminded myself, and I remind students as well, that whenever we're looking at something, say either new contemporary making or restoration, this was done 200 years ago. If it was done 200 years ago without electricity or the machines we have today, there has to be a simple way to do it because they did not have sophisticated equipment. What they did have was great skill and great time. And that's something that's partially lost today, but it's still something else I learned in what I was doing. After I finished my apprenticeship, I knew that there was more to the horological world than what I was seeing. I also knew that I was not going to learn it if I stayed in Australia. Even if I'd moved to Sydney, which is a much better city, it was still the same kind of problem. So, and it was not uncommon in these days, is I took myself off to England. Let's go to England and work there and see what we can do. So I did. Took one of the last ships that sailed around, not a cruise ship, just a sailing ship. That went around the world delivering essentially new immigrants to Australia and New Zealand, and then returning to the UK and Europe to pick up more. And this was just about the time the big jumbo jets started, the 747s started to become popular, and air travel became more affordable. And so I came 6 weeks from Perth to London via the Panama on a virtually a cattle ship with the worst food we've ever had. So got to London, not sure what to do, walked around the place, walked where everyone said was the horological district in Hatton Garden, looked at it and I said, this is terrible, I don't want to walk here. It was in a state of depression. So I happened to go down Bond Street. I thought, I like Bond Street, this is nice, I feel like this, I belong here, this is good. So come Monday, I went in and I went to Garrard's, who were no longer there, in Regent Street. And I walked into the front door, and it was my first experience as a door that you had to press a buzzer. And then there was a guard open the door, and why can't I open the door? And so they let me in, and I walked in and went to the repair department and said, I'm looking for a job. And, okay, and so wait till they got the man down from upstairs, and he came in and had an interview, and this is okay. And he said, would you like to start on Monday? Sure, okay, I can do that. And he said, but when you come in, will you please use the tradesman's entrance? The front door is not for you. And I thought, okay. So it went on. So that was actually enjoyable, and I stayed there for 3 years. And then travelled to Vienna in Austria. Part of this was because I had a Viennese friend in Australia, a woman watchmaker, and she had just wanted to sort of discover the world as well. And she said, if I get to Austria, Vienna, and want to come and visit me, please. And if you'd like a job, call me and I'll arrange an appointment with somebody. So I thought, well, I had enough of living in England. I spoke some German, but I wanted to live in a culture and a country that was not my own. And going from Australia to England, except for the climate, there wasn't much different. The language was the same, the social mores were the same, manners and habits were the same. So I wanted something else. I wanted to discover. So I was offered a job there, and I stayed, and I liked it. It was, again, working for Omega. The place I started with was an Omega agent. London was Omega, and I was there, was very comfortable with it. And I worked for them for quite some time, liked it, did well. And there was a point where I got, again, I'm not sure disillusioned is the right word, but I realized I didn't have the right corporate mindset. As in, I rattled the cage when I felt like it. We were supposed to start promptly at a certain time and leave promptly at a certain time. And I found I couldn't do that. I just had to I realized that the boss was standing at the door at 7:50 in the morning to see everybody in. But I realized at 8:05 he went to his office so I could come in at 8:10. And I just did it because I could. And and the other guys there said, they said, why do you do it? I said, because I can and you guys won't. There's got to be some fake creativity in this place. And then I was enjoying the delights of England, of Europe, of skiing, mountains in the summer, which was good. And I decided I saw something about going trekking out of Kathmandu in Nepal. So I thought this would be nice, and like most Europeans, we had 4 weeks holiday a year. So I said, it's a long way to India. I'd like to see a few other things on the way. So I asked if I could have 2 weeks off unpaid leave, and they said no. And I said, okay. And this was in March, so I thought about it, and I thought this time, I'd travelled around Europe camping, so I had all the camping equipment. In 1975, I had a new Range Rover when nobody else had a Range Rover. I thought, why don't I drive? So I did. And so I planned out, and come end of July, I got my things together, went to a friend's wedding in England and left England, and I drove to India. And through Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, went to Sri Lanka, and went trekking in Nepal, which was really good, and then came back, returned later. And it took a year, which was one of the best years I ever thought. Now, there's a reason to this. It's actually, of having spent the time, and in India I didn't want to go on a tour, sort of being independent. The sort of being on a bus tour or something like that is just appalling to me. I'm just not going to make it, and I know that, and being with everyone else. I thought, we can do this with my own transport. I can go anywhere in the country. I go to places where, as was told me, where white faces haven't been seen for 100 years. And which let me I went to odd temples, went to odd places around the country, which was really good. And a few other tourists I'd met there who were like backpacking or something complained, it's okay for the rich who can afford to drive their car. I said, yeah, but do you know how much it's cost me to do this? It's not cheap, just to do what needs to be done. But I had a great affinity for India, and I had a great amount of learning there. And then after India, Pakistan, back to Afghanistan, and I was driving on the road from Kabul to Kandahar, which at that point, the United States had actually paid to pave. Well, the paving is gone, it's just potholes now and bomb holes. But I was driving along there thinking about it, and Afghanistan after India, which is such a crowded country with people, cars, dogs, cats, cattle, everything on the road, is challenging to most Westerners. And Afghanistan was actually quite mild, and we were flying down the road at about 60 kilometers an hour, which was, compared to India, where like 40 was fast, because you just couldn't do anything else. And it suddenly occurred to me the difference between the West and the East, just in that point of driving along. And I understood something I hadn't understood about quality and quantity. In the West we have lots of quantity, but in many times there's not enough quality. And I saw in India they didn't have so much quantity of things, but they had quality and a quality of life. I know it's very strange amid abject poverty, but there was a certain compassion amongst people, strangers you meet, who were quite open and interested and fun and entertaining and wanted to learn and and to show everything. And that taught me. And then from that thought on, I thought, okay, so that's there. And of course, I knew people who I worked with in Europe who were really just working for their pension, 9 to 5 to collect their paycheck on Friday and waiting for the day of 65 to retire. And that was their entire ambition in life, which didn't appeal to me. So I thought, what am I offering to the quality? And I decided not a whole lot more. And at that point, I decided that when I get back to Europe, I'm going to make my own watch. And part of it was, it's my contribution to world's quality. It may not be the best made, it may not be the best available, but I try and produce my best. And I think the world would be a better place if everybody produced their best rather than just enough to keep their job. And so I aim at doing this. And so my contribution is watches and clocks in horology. And the photos here, the top photo of the skeleton clock is the first clock I made in 1978. It took me a year. And it's a copy of an antique piece. At this point, I decided there was two things I needed to do. I got back into, after I was still working for Omega, after-hours restoration of antique pocket watches, which can be enormously fascinating. And as I tell trainees and people, if you want to learn what you're doing, going to school is good. Getting the training is good. But to understand the depth of pieces, George Daniels, Derek Pratt, Anthony Randall, Dufour, Jean are all in this category. If they came up through the trade, they did servicing work, and they did a lot of antique restoration and then vintage watchworks. You see the good, the bad, and the indifferent of what's a really good idea to maybe use one day and what's a bad idea to avoid like the plague. But in particular, construction methods. And one of the methods is, the lower photograph is a perpetual calendar clock I made in 1992. And it has the George Daniels perpetual calendar mechanism in it. And I chose that in part because it's an instant change and retrograde, as well as it had all the features that I wanted in the piece. And one of the things I did is when I did it, I made the clock as a watch pattern. I got permission in writing from George for both the perpetual calendar and the coaxial escapement. And I made the clock in such a way that the entire calendar plate can be lifted off without interfering with the movement. Because in doing restoration on pocket watches, I'd find you take the dial off. To make a minor change, you had to take the chronograph parts off, you had to take the calendar work off, just to set the friction on the cannon pinion. Which is, I'm doing 4 hours work for something that takes 30 seconds. So I designed, as a better idea, just 4 screws, the entire calendar plate comes off, and you can do whatever you need to the movement and put it back on. If you want to work with the calendar plate separately, you can put the dial back on the clock and have the clock ticking while you're working on that. And amongst the things I've always been interested in was high precision timekeeping, not just decorative timekeeping. And to this end, when I arrived in the States, a client, Bill Taylor in Los Angeles, who took most of the photos here, is a professional photographer. He has a special effects Hollywood studio. He asked me, could I make a copy, my version emulation of Philip Woodward's W5, which is an all-mechanical free pendulum clock, and the first new mechanical escapement in more than 150 years for a clock. So, in the case, which is not a good photo of it, was his design. He has particularly modern house, and he likes asymmetric pieces. And when I say a free pendulum, it's unattached from the movement. The pendulum oscillates is impulsed every 30 seconds, and it oscillates freely. The slave pendulum triggers the escapement and impulses via a gravity lever the pendulum, and then via the train, the gravity lever is relocked. The graph that's there that we see on here is this part here. This is an earthquake. Now, I sort of got in trouble at times about doing this. When we measured this clock, when people talk about accuracy of watches a few seconds a day, it's like, really? That's precision? This gets measured in parts per million, because seconds per day is just simply too inaccurate on it. So this was actually, I actually didn't feel this earthquake. This was in the Gulf of Mexico, or Sea of Cortez, whichever you want to call it. And I was standing in front of the, this is on a screenshot of my computer, and I thought, oh darn, something's happened to the thing. So when this happened, I went out and checked it. And I had the clock still going. What was it? So I checked on the internet, and there's a timestamp on this as well. I checked the internet. There was, I think, I don't have it up there. I think it was a 6.4 earthquake in the Gulf of Mexico, 1,500 miles away. And that's the result here of this is interference to the pendulum. The pendulum felt it. Now, when you make a high precision pendulum, the next thing you get is a barograph. It's affected by barometric pressure. First you get a thermometer, then it's affected by temperature, then a barometric pressure affects it. And when you improve barometric pressure, because this has barometric compensation, you end up with a seismograph. Now in California, that's a problem. And with this clock, I can, if I have the pendulum pickup set up on every beat, I can measure foot me walking around on the floor. I can also, not in summer, but in winter, there's quite a long bridge over a river near us. It's probably a good half-mile long with the normal joints. And when trucks go over it, I can measure the trucks going over the joins in the bridge. Not in summer, but in winter when the soil is wet, the vibration transmits better. And that's probably half a mile or it's more than 3/4 of a mile away from me. And the pendulum is so accurate that I can pick that up. And I can't possibly compensate for that. But earthquakes are sort of an interesting thing. I've recorded several, but that was the first one I did. Now, it's nothing new, but it was the first time it had done it for me, and it was really impressive. This is a little... since then, there's not 20 clocks anymore, it's now 22. This particular piece, I actually consider my masterpiece in clocks. It's a double pendulum clock based on Abraham Louis Breguet's design that's actually in Buckingham Palace, which I like to tell people, if you're interested, it's a one owner. And it's still in the original position. And I have never seen it. I actually tried to see it, but getting into Buckingham Palace nowadays, apart from the tourist areas, is like getting in the White House. You actually need a Class A security license permit to actually even get in. And the thing is, you can get it if you're persistent enough, but in reality, they make it hard because they just don't want people in there. So I thought I didn't do it. So this is actually the 5th one of these I've made, and the most complicated. And I'm sure you can read it. But apart from being a double pendulum clock itself, which is already a major complication for it, it's equation of time, which is equation en marchant, which means the equation mechanism here it turns around with the dials, and it just shows you how fast or slow that hand is compared to mean solar time. So you have apparent time. Apparent time is sundial time. Sunrise, sunset is actually set for Greenwich because the clock's in London. That's what the client wanted. And I've created it in such a way that it also allows for daylight saving. So there's a bump in it that pushes it forward to allow for daylight saving. An annual calendar, a perpetual calendar, which I mentioned with George Danielson's retrograde date, instant calendar, month, day, and leap year indication, an equation calendar. Equation does not have leap years. And that's on the left-hand movement. On the right-hand movement, which is sidereal timekeeper. Now, I'm sure some of you know what sidereal time is, but essentially, sidereal time is the Earth's position taken against 3 fixed stars as opposed to the sun. And it's what's used by astronomers and engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers often use the sidereal time for measuring where things are. Part of surveying work in the country anywhere is done with sidereal time. And sidereal time doesn't have a leap year, and it's slightly faster than mean solar time. So I developed in there, and Fortunate has seen it, I developed a special sidereal conversion train because both the pendulums on the clock are seconds pendulums. Because they're locked into resonance in antiphase, you can't have one pendulum shorter than the other. The closer they are together, the better. So what I did was develop a train which has 7 wheels in it, all of prime numbers, that convert mean solar time to sidereal time with an error of 2.6 seconds in 3.5 years. And the owner who has it is fastidious. He has this electronic gadget with all stuff on it, and he says every week he goes and checks it, and now after 3 years it's 2 seconds out, which is well within what I want. That's actually pretty darn good. And a planisphere, which I'm particularly happy with. The planisphere is this. This is a disc of jewel-grade lapis lazuli, which came out of a big rock that looked almost like the size of a pumpkin. When we cut sideways to do it, you can't see it. You can barely see it in the photograph. The month lines are 22 karat red gold. There's stars in there of 5 different sizes, recognizing the main 5 magnitudes of stars in the sky, and they're all in the right position. So it took quite a while to actually get that done. Even getting the lapis, a piece of lapis that was 75 millimeters in diameter, 4 inches, so it's a pretty big piece. And they're all put there in the right spot, and it rotates once a year. And the reason that this window here is odd is because it depends where you are compared to the equator. And that's what the horizon looks like at the latitude of Greenwich. If you were further south, it would look different. If you were further north, it would look quite different again. And the other part I particularly like is on here is what's called a wandering moon. It was designed and built by Henri Janvier about 1780. I know he's used it on 3 clocks. To my knowledge, nobody else has ever used it, which is a disappointment because it's a gorgeous piece of work. And it's wandering, so the moon rotates, the moon system rotates around the dial once in 24 hours. And during the course of that moon, it actually shows the ages of the moon, the angle of moon to the sun. I see somebody's written Sunday. Phases of the moon, and its instant change from waxing to waning. And then there's a date disc here. Sorry. There's a date disc here, which tells you the days to the next new moon. And it's actually, it's very accurate and very representative of what the moon is. Now, I've actually used this movement recently in the tourbillon I made, and it's going into a watch also soon. And it's the moon itself, because I want is 22 karat red. The moon itself is platinum, and it's mottled to look like the moon's surface. And the shutter is blued steel that's domed so that it kind of gives it the proper shadow, and the sun is 22 karat red gold. And the sun is actually quite deeply formed. And there's a photograph of me alongside it, and then the photograph on the lower right is myself and friend John Kirk in Santa Barbara, who's an astronomer, who helps me with some of the astronomical things, and he also helped with the sidereal train conversion. And this photograph here, somebody asked us, I think it was Brianna, what we do, and there's you can't see it really well enough, but there's my 2 favorite tools for watch repairs, a hammer and a wrench. It will fix any problem. You'll never have a problem with that piece again. This was a piece I completed probably about 18 months ago. It's in Tim Jackson's Independent in Time store in Solana Beach in California, and it's a contemporary watchmaker's regulator. And it's black because it doesn't look so good in my house, but it looked terrific in the location. It fits in beautifully. The pendulum and the brassware is all rhodium plated. It's a fused silica pendulum rod and it's temperature compensated. The fittings are all Invar in it, months running with a visible escapement. So he has it in the wall in there because he felt like, as a retailer of like independent watches, instead of trying to set a really nice watch from somebody, V.H.I, Holt or Dufour or somebody, against a quartz watch, it'd be nice to have a mechanical clock. When I got back from India, I started to make a watch. I had a pocket watch, and I thought, I'm going to copy that. I'll just, it's a good way to start. I had something I knew it worked. And I got part of the way through it, and I just simply did not have enough tooling to do it. And then this was the days, the faxes didn't even exist, never mind email. And so everything was done by snail mail very slowly. So it took quite a long time to accumulate tools, equipment, materials. And about this time, the Swiss industry was in trouble from the quartz revolution, which I was aware of, but I truly didn't appreciate how difficult it was. It was very hard to get anything. But I came across some clockmaking equipment. I thought, I have to do something. I can't sit here and do nothing. So I thought, I'm going to do that, and that's how come I made that first clock, and that got me interested. And shortly after that, one of my clients brought in the first really good clock I'd seen, as opposed to just a normal domestic piece. And I thought, and that got me a whole lot more interested in clocks. And I thought, there's a world here. And the world of quartz was not for me. I tried it, I looked at it, and I thought, no, I'm not going to go there. I think I'm staying with the mechanics. And so we went through that, and it says 18 months, but a while ago, longer than that, I decided it was time to get what I started to do back in 1978. I wanted to, I was trained as a watchmaker. I diversed into clocks, and in the time, I work alone. No CNC, all two hands, hacksaws, files, machining, whatever else is there. I've made about 240 clocks, which is pretty good, and some of them are very difficult to make. They're not just simple, straightforward things, they're complicated. But it was time to get back into watches, so I made the change back to watches again. And there'll be a photograph in a minute. I made for a client in Sydney what turned out to be the world's smallest carriage clock. Because he wanted something, and he wanted a proper carriage clock with a balance and a platform on top, not on the back or a watch movement stuck in something. And the Presidio watches came next, and the platinum watch, of which is still not finished, but I have a movement here to show later if someone would like to see it, and the white watch series, which I'm wearing, and Brianna has one, and almost finished is Azure, which has perhaps let me change this first. These are photographs of me working on things that Brianna has taken. This is the miniature carriage clock. That's a 1 cent piece. That watch, that clock is smaller than most watches. I actually have a photograph of it sitting on here, and the watch is big. And it was quite a challenge to do it. And also the dial on it is a silver engine turn dial by Joshua Shapiro, who you know. And it's probably the smallest engine turn dial ever made, turned out. And again, in the top of it, because the client is actually in Sydney, Australia, he wanted a map of Australia on there. So it's in the decoration. And you can see on top I made a complete platform, and along with the escapement in top. It's sort of what has become my idea of using a bar on 2 pillars to support the balance. And also it has my hands. I developed these hands, which I just simply call DW style. And the watches have it. I designed it for clocks. And one of the things, as an independent, I believe one has to do is you have to come up with things that haven't been done. There's lots of competition. There's many, many watches made over the years by very creative people. But if I'm going to do something, it has to stand out different. It can't be just yet another something else off the shelf. So I tell people, for instance, one of the things you have to develop your own style. And we know Roger Smith, George Daniels, Dufour, you look at them, you know what it is. You can see the style. And that's a part of creativity that has to come out, and which partly I think comes, in my mind, from restoration and other ideas, that things you may have assimilated together and put together to come to what's you. But something should be undeniably mine. And as a few clients have said, once you've seen one of David's clocks, you'll immediately recognize another. Another comment I've had is clock people look and said, "Oh, you're not a clockmaker, really, you're a watchmaker." "Yes, but how did you know?" I said, "No clockmaker would ever make wheels that delicate." And I thought, well, thank you. The exhibition Tourbillon. And this was commissioned by a client who wanted it as an anniversary gift for his wife. And part of the thing, he asked for two things. He was aware of the story of George Washington's watch that was eventually accredited to him by an engraving under the dial from a repair date that was registered somewhere. So under the dial, where you can't see it, the only time you'll ever see it was when the dial is removed, is an engraving of that it was presented by this person to his wife for the anniversary in this year. And on the back of it, he has an engraving from one of his favourite songs of James Taylor, and to which, I'm sorry, I can't remember what the engraving says now. So this tourbillon, this is based on Breguet 1252, which was the table tourbillon that he made. Breguet made for three reasons. One was for an exhibition in Paris, 1820 something, or 18, I'm not sure. It had two things in it. It had his newly developed tourbillon and a constant force escapement. And he did it in this, and not in a pocket watch, he did it this so you could see it. And of course it was actually bought by King George IV. And in those days, when the king came in and said, "How much is that?" you can't say it's not for sale. The only answer is a price. And so it's not in the royal collection, it's actually in private hands now. But nobody had ever made a second version of it. And I thought, and when The Art of Breguet came out in the book by Daniels, there were three things in there that I saw that I absolutely loved, and I thought, I have to make these. One was the double pendulum clock, one was the three-wheel clock, and the other one was the table tourbillon. And I have now made all three. But I didn't want to, I wanted to do it in a nicer looking case and style than the way Breguet had done it. And also so that that's in the case here, so that it can be seen from the front, the top, and the sides. So you can actually have it on your desk and you look at it. The tourbillon carriage is 52 millimeters in diameter. So it's big enough that you can see without having to peer at it and enjoy it. It's fitted, I did make, and the photograph is here, I did make a constant force escapement. And there is actually no really good details about it, but there are some, and they're wrong. The way it's written, you can't make it. The other thing was it required an enormous amount of energy to make it run. So I changed from a constant force escapement to using a Peto cross-deton chronometer escapement, which turns out I'm the only one to have made one this century, and one of only three others to have made it in the last 120 years. So it's particularly interesting in that. Again, I have here is the wandering moon, sun there, moon there with the shutter here, hands on it, and of course the date. This part here is the wandering mechanism, most of it in my hand. Obviously a side view, above view. The photograph here on the lower right is actually the constant force escapement. It's actually very difficult to make. There's 3 spring detons in it. And when I have had it running, and it did work quite well. But it occurred to me in the thoughts of quality and getting it right, that while I could adjust that and set that up, and most repairs have problems with spring detons and marine chronometer escapements anyway, it's too complicated. And I don't like the way that that sounds. It means it's very difficult for somebody in the future, 50 or 100 years, to be able to repair it. And I don't want somebody to have something I've made that cannot be fixed because it's so darn complicated. So I chose to go back to the Detton. And of course, the winding section here, and this is the sun hand. The Presidio watch. Now, this was, when I first met Joshua Shapiro, let me digress slightly. I'd started off, one of the reasons I delayed making the watch was I had no luck with making my own dials. I tried and it just was not what I thought was very good. And then I came across Joshua Shapiro, who was just beginning to make it. And I had 5 soap rod movements and 5 cases to go with it. So why don't we, as a test run for what we're now doing, why don't we do these to sort of iron out some problems and see what we can do? And so I made the Presidio watches. Now, that one's actually my wife's, because the agreement was the first one is mine, right? And so she has it, and I actually have it here for later, if anyone wants to look. But the point, again, my hands on it, a nice dial, and a Swiss movement. The platinum watch. Again, in thinking of doing things different, I was asking people, collectors I knew, when it comes to watch, of wanting to do something different to what everybody else did. The most common material for watch movements for the plates is brass. Sometimes they're plated, sometimes not. Then comes along nickel and German silver, which is actually pretty good. It's used by a lot of people, and I've used it as well, which is really nice to work with. It tarnishes a little, but it's nothing like brass, and it's a good material that finishes very well. It's fun to work with. And I thought, well, F.B.H.I uses gold for some of his movements. Oh, that's pretty nice. And I thought, well, yeah, but people have done that, and there are other gold movements, but what about platinum? And I thought, that seems like a good idea. So I asked myself, platinum sounds interesting. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to do that. Well, as far as I know, this is the only all-platinum movement ever. And I know why. It's really difficult to machine. Really difficult, slow. It will blunt carbide tips like you can't imagine. And yet, strangely enough, when you come to work it by hand, the cocks and bridges here are cut out of a piece. I start off this with two discs, and they get screwed together and machined and shaped. This one actually is the second version. It actually has around here, around the ratchet wheel, a band of red gold to stand out against the platinum, because the platinum ended up the balance bridge is blued, which I don't think anyone else has ever done, but I did it because when it was polished, I looked at the watch and it was so blinding white I couldn't see a darn thing. So I blued the balance bridge, which I thought has come out really good, and I added in the gold surrounding the ratchet wheel. But when it comes to cutting these things out, or cutting it with a piercing saw or filing it at finish, it's beautiful to work with. It's the nicest stuff you've ever worked. It just flows and it's smooth and it's really nice. But as soon as you want to drill or tap it, it fights you back every inch of the way. It's really, really challenging, which is, the cost is one thing. There's almost $5,000 worth of platinum in that. And the chips that came out of it was nearly $2,000. So you worry about the chips when you shouldn't be worrying. There's more important things. I'd finished here. The movement is more or less, this is a rendering of what it's going to be. The case, of course, is platinum, bezels front and back, and a coin edge. I wanted something, again, nice, and again, a client has several Abraham Louis Breguet pocket watches, who I think may have invented coin edging. And it's really nice, and I looked at some of the production coin edging and decided it was lacking. I know how they did it, and I know why it's lacking, but that will have a coin edge on it when the case is finally done. Also, of course, we'll have a platinum crown that it will make for it, and with a silver engine turn dial. Other thing about this, and I got this idea again from Breguet, was I'm not keen on lots of writing all over the watch movement. We see it, and it bugs me. It's the minimalist in me. I don't need all that. What do I need to know this for? So what I did, I added a secret signature, which you can just catch the light on it here, and you can see it there as well, because I've tried to photograph it so you could see it. If you just look at it straight, it's not there. And there's also up here on the train bridge a number. And I could do this on platinum because it's engraved. We melt red gold into it, molten. And the reason we can do it is that melting temperature differences between gold and platinum. And when it's finished, and it's finished flush, so you can look at it and there's nothing there. You catch the light and you see the secret signature, which is very satisfying to me. You know, it's there if you look for it, but it's not screaming and yelling at you. Now, part of all this may not sound like it's together, but in being an independent horologist is, to me, to think outside the box. Don't do what everyone else has done. You know, follow the thought, do your own things. But in many cases, you have to reinvent the wheel yourself. And if ever I have a problem, I always remind myself, this was done 200 years ago with no electricity. There has to be a way to do it. And if it was done then, why can't I do it now? So it's a good answer to do it. Also, have to sort of, if where possible, surround yourself with people who are capable of some things like engine turning dials, which I didn't really want to sort of get into. I thought, I'm already doing enough. I don't want to spend 2 years learning that for something that I use only on each watch rather than more commonly. So in finding things out and discovering things, need to put myself into it. And I tell students to do the same thing. Don't try and copy somebody else. Be yourself. Be original. That's what's going to make quality. It's going to make something that hopefully somebody will spend their money on and appreciate. Which is why I appreciate. My idea is to create and offer something. And I have to offer something that some people want. Oh, we're continuing. The platinum. Excuse me. This is the plate in part production. A close-up of the train bridge, which actually, as I think, has come out quite nicely. And here, the number is just there, but you almost can't see it because the angle is wrong to the light. This is a different platinum movement. I have two movements. This is a different movement that hasn't got the red gold inlay around it. And that's the making of the platinum dial. It's the silver dial for the platinum watch. It's partially finished. This came as a commission from a client up in San Francisco Bay Area, and he wanted something different. He didn't want another wristwatch. He wanted a pocket watch. In particular, he wanted a pocket watch with 2 barrels. And I thought, well, and I can understand that. So can I do something like that? And yeah, but I think. Okay, I've got the idea and of what's there. We talked about it, and then came the case. He didn't want gold or platinum. It was it was not too heavy. He just didn't want gold or platinum. So what else can we do? I mean, German silver is nice for a case, but it's sort of a bit uninteresting. Doesn't have the purchase to it. So we came up with tantalum. You know, once again, why pick something easy when you can pick something difficult to work with? Now, and I have some tantalum pieces here. Tantalum does not exist as a metal. It's an oxide that's found, well, one place is Pakistan. And the oxide is broken out, broken out, and it's fused at 8,000 degrees to create tantalum metal. And you only can get it as 99.99. There's no alloy. And it's heavy. It's in the platinum family. And again, it's probably worse to work with than platinum is. Filing it, handwork on it is actually quite good, but in machining it, it's terrible. But again, I managed to do it, and this is the final case that's there, and again with the coin edge. And when I finished cutting the coin edge, I cut it slowly with carbide tip, a new carbide cutter, lots of cutting oil on it. And oh God, that looks rough. And I realized it wasn't. It's the way the metal comes out. So when you cut tantalum, and with a blade or a cutter, you end up seeing the crystalline structure of the metal because it's been fused. It's not a natural metal. And when it's polished, in those photographs, that's polished, but it doesn't polish like gold or platinum. And it come out actually really quite nice. And also, of course, it's soft, so it bruises easy. The movement is German silver here. And I made the crown, of course, I made is also tantalum. And I didn't want a standard bow. And I wanted a bow that was strong, because this thing is heavy. So I came out with a different bow that I haven't seen before, and I like it. This is the top plate, where the two barrels will go. There's the holes there, the marks is where it's going to get cut away, and here is on the piercing saw, where I've actually cut the German silver away, and we can see here what it looks like. Now, this is of course under dial finished. The watch is running, but it's not finished. But the dial is still being made for it. Now, an interesting thing on this, I made this truss shape in part because of my friend Derek Pratt. He used a Pratt truss in his pocket watches, which as soon as I saw it was drop dead gorgeous. I thought, well, I'm going to do that, and I made this in honor of him because of the two barrels going into the piece. And another client said, do you know what you've done? And I thought, something good, I hope. And he said, that's a Walter truss. I said, okay. And he said, it's a Walter truss. Yes. And I said, no. He said, really, there's a Pratt truss and a Warren truss, which is the most common. But prior to that, it's a Walter truss. And I'm pretty sure you'd seen it. If you've ever been any of the bridges in Madison County, they're all made with Walter trusses. And I only knew that earlier this year when the client came out. So I'm actually quite flattered that I've actually made a Walter truss. Another thing about this watch is entirely made in USA. There's no Swiss parts in it at all. Everything, including the jewels, are made in USA. And that's a first for a very long time, and probably the first on the West Coast, completely. Because I don't think there was ever anybody who made complete watches at all. The white, which is what I'm wearing now, this was an idea that somebody came to with, can you do something like this? And I thought, okay. And well, it's my interpretation of working with Omega. I knew the caliber inside out. The Omega 260 caliber was one of those things that everybody wished they made. It's super strong, it worked, it keeps working, it's well made, it's very well engineered, and it's a superb movement. But I've extensively modified it from what it was. I've also made parts for it and altered it from what it is. So there's almost no way to realize that this is actually an Omega base. So yes, I'm using it, but I've also extensively modified everything in the piece so that it's not even recognizable. And I came along, this here, tray here, is the pieces after I had just finished and rhodium plated everything and cleaned it and was ready for assembly. And I thought, I'll take a photograph of that, it looks nice. And so I put spotting, perlage, literally over every surface because I thought it needed it and it looked good. It finished it off very nicely. Further to that, of course, my own click in it, I developed a new type of snailing on the ratchet wheel. Now, we know snailing is not new, but nobody has ever done this before. And I actually call it butterfly snailing because of the effect. And you look at it, we were looking at it last night, every time you look at it, it shifts. Is it a square? Is it an octagon? Is it round? And nobody has ever done this. And I know why. It's difficult. And I've probably made 20 or so ratchet wheels before I got the result I want. And the two watches I have here, if you put them side by side, they're different. And part of what I do, I don't want to make a production that's all the same. Interchangeability of parts, yes, but I want each watch is, because I make them one at a time by hand and finish it off, each watch is individual. Then there's no two will ever be the same. In fact, I almost live in fear that someone will want a match pair because I don't know how to do it. Because each time I do something, that could be a little bit better, and that was not such a good idea, I won't do that again. So I would have possible difficulty in doing such work. The crowns I made myself out of stainless steel. I was going to use a factory crown, until I realized stainless steel crowns are not stainless steel. There's a sheath over a brass collar. And they're thick, they're solid enough that you never ever notice or wear out. And so I thought, well, I can't do that. So I made my own crowns out of stainless steel. And I also put my logo in it. The watch also has here, everything I make, my maker's mark, not the logo, my maker's mark is a swan. And I chose that from where I came from, because Perth, Western Australia is the home to the black swan. And I grew up around it, and I was always fascinated by them cruising around, the signets that start off yellow and end up black. And so that's my maker's mark, and that same maker's mark appears on the crown. And there's two versions of the watch, one with Arabic numeral dial, another one with Roman numeral. And there's a third one they were working on which will have classical Chinese characters on it. Trainees. I need a drink before we get to them. One of the things I'd always wanted to do would be to have somebody or somebodies who would follow in footsteps. Have something. I learnt the hard way. When I was learning more after my apprenticeship, 70s and early 80s, the information was not there. The old men of the trade were either gone, or they were so tired they just didn't even want to talk about it anymore. So I had to reinvent most of these wheels myself. Nobody taught me about wheel cutting. Nobody taught me about mathematics. No one taught me about design. No one taught me about metallurgy. I taught myself. I learnt the whole lot. And I thought I wanted to do it, so I went out and learnt. Now, I found I needed to know something about a particular area of mathematics. I didn't want to do a PhD. I just wanted to know that paragraph. So I went and found that paragraph and learnt what I need to know. But I would like to pass on the good that I've learnt, plus as well as make any trainee aware of the pitfalls and the problems, so that they don't fall into the same thing and waste a year and a half to realizing that this was a blind alley. And none of this is in the books. None of it's shown. It's just what I've managed to learn through. Lived in 4 different countries on 3 different continents. It's a fair bit to do. So having trainees, and Brianna Lee, who is one of the instructors for HSNY, I'd met through the Jean Boutique in West Hollywood. They told me they were doing a watch teaching class, and I asked, okay, who's going to do that? And because I at that point had not even heard about the classes. And once I had, I realized what a boon and how much thanks we should give to Nick and the HSNY for actually doing this. And it's been super successful, which shows how much pent-up demand there is for it and the desire to learn. So we know Brianna, we can see her, and the other one is Peter Doble. He's an ENT doctor. He has his own practice in Twin Falls, Idaho. He's collected marine chronometers all his life. He has a nice Breguet marine chronometer. He has one of only 2 known Paul Dittersheim deck watches with a spring detonate escapement and not a lever escapement. And then he asked me to do something, and he thought he knew about horology. Well, what he actually knew about was collecting. And then he realized that this is really interesting, and he's planning to retire in a few years' time. So he's setting up a complete workshop to make his own marine chronometer. But I gave him a task, the same as I gave Brianna. You cannot copy something. You have to think, I'll help. You have to think outside of the box. Think of something you want to do, and we'll do it. I don't want you just to slavishly do yet another copy of something else that's there. I want you to contribute something to horology, the quality factor. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't even work first time, but do it. And so he's actually come up with an idea that I can't talk about, but it hasn't been done. But Daniels and Frodsham thinks they've found a problem and solved it, but they haven't. They've got around it. And I think he may have solved the problem, but he has yet to make it and prove it. And so Brianna has a long way ahead of her in life, and she's actually doing really good as well. She's a good student and listens. These are pieces that Brianna has done. I'll start at the top left here, is a balance staff she turned when she was a trainee at the WASTEP course in Miami some years ago. This piece, I'm going to drop down here. This is one of my notepads. It was an envelope out of the circular filing cabinet that came in with the junk. And instead of using a good piece of paper, I'll use something that I have, and I'll write out or make a scribble drawing on it. And we've had this conversation before, and this is one of my notebooks. I'll do it on here first, I'll transfer it to there, and then from there it goes into a master book. Now, when I came back from Europe to Australia, my father gave me what was a bills for collection ledger, a big British book about that thick, this wide, so deep. And I'd never used it. And then I realized at the George Daniels auction of his goods, George had exactly the same book that he put his watches in, from the same printer even. So I thought, so now I put everything into that because it seems, well, George did it, it's good enough for me. And so what I do is I'll make here drawings, and I've been scolded at times, like, well, you don't do CAD drawings, you don't fully dimension everything. I said, well, I can't use CAD, but yes, I can draw and do. If I need to make a precise drawing, I will. Pencil and paper, because that's the way I'm good at. But first up, all that really matters is I have here, here, and here. I have the mathematical dimensions correct. What the drawing looks like doesn't matter at all. And I hadn't realized this either until I saw George's book, and I saw a photograph of a copy of some of Abraham Breguet's book, and it looks just like my book. and it's regular, and it's just clean and explanatory, and it works for me. Now, this here, drawing here, was calculations, and Brianna made this pinion. This is for a regulator clock she's building and part of learning, a 20-leaf pinion. I made her calculate the dimensions after I showed her how. She cut the wheel, hardened, tempered, and polished it. That's an extremely good pinion. And to go with it, these are the wheels, the month wheel, center wheel, third wheel, and escape wheel for a deadbeat escapement. And here, I'm not quite sure what I was doing, but Brianna took a selfie of herself in the back of my head. Here is actually cutting one of the wheel there that's on the barrel here, the great wheel. And here she's working, I'm not sure what she's doing there. She's looking at me, she's on the lathe, that's right, cutting something. And then finally, this is her polishing something else. So it's hands, so the teacher is being taught. And actually, as a good student, she picks it up. And again, as an instructor, it's nice when students listen, and it's even better when students ask intelligent questions, and then think about it and ask another question. Not silly questions, but intelligent, which shows me, okay, this person's learning. They've thought through the process. They thought through what they want to do. They want to see how it wants to go. And it gives me more encouragement to pass on more and see how it goes. Apart from the things I need, and everybody needs, some kind of co-workers or something, people who can do things. And then this thing, Vegan Papelian is a goldsmith in downtown LA. He made cast the platinum blanks for me for the watch. And he also made that gold sun and the platinum moon that you saw. And a lot of goldsmiths are not up to doing sort of independent work, and he does one-off things, and that's something I could work with precious metals, but I'm nowhere near as competent as what he is. Brianna Lee, of course, Joshua Shapiro, we know for dials. Artur Akhmeyev has only been in the States a couple of years, but he's an excellent engraver. The engraving you will see on the watches and the tourbillon is all done by him. And Marianne custom makes the bands for me. And once again, I'm picky about bands on watches. I see all kinds of things at all kinds of horrific prices, and they're all lacking. And I found this guy, he actually approached me, and I looked at it thinking, these bands are really, the stitching is really good. And I don't mind that there's a little error in the stitching because somebody made it by hand. It's not absolutely perfect, except it's executed really well. And it's a super high quality band. And I only put this watch on for the first time yesterday, and almost immediately the band just came straight close to my arm and felt how I wanted it to be. And of course, I have to give big thank to Gary Getz, who did some photographs and an article for me a while ago. There's Bill Taylor, who did the photography for me and has the W5 and other pieces, and some of the photos. Of course, many thanks to HSNY and to Nick Manousis, who made all this happen. Because without him, I wouldn't be here, and probably you might not be either, and the world's a much better place for Nick giving his version of quality to the world. And we're not finished. My final saying that I like to close with, and I only discovered this a few years ago. Perfection has been achieved not when there is something more to add, but when there is nothing left to remove. Anton de Saint-Exupéry. And I couldn't think of anything more fitting, because I see so many pieces that have stuff added on that's unnecessary. And this statement, I thought, sums up what I do perfectly. And I like to create something that's there and offer something that's never been offered before. And most of all, I have to admit, I'm really happy to be doing this in America. This is really something special to me. And being here is something special. We had a discussion this morning. When did I hear about HSNY? Well, probably when I was 16. But New York was so far removed from Perth, Western Australia, that it was almost impossible to think about. And it's nice to be doing this. That's my contact. Thank you.
All right, any questions for David Walter? Raise your hand and they'll bring the microphone to you. We'll start here with John.
Thanks for this. It was really great to get to see some of your clocks and hear about your life story. I wanted to ask, you made some comments about the accuracy of wristwatches being sort of trivial compared to the accuracy that you're used to. But are there any ideas from maybe your free pendulum clocks that could actually be applied to wristwatch mechanisms?
Not really, it's a resonator. And in a watch, the resonator is the balance. In a clock, it's the pendulum. It's a big, massive thing. Seconds pendulum is a meter, 39 inches long. And it's easy to stabilize, in part because it's doing 1 beat a second, as opposed to many beats a second. I actually haven't seen anything, but I haven't put a lot of thought into it. One of the things I did use that actually helped accuracy in pendulum, which might go into it, and I don't know if somebody supposedly was doing it in Europe, France, I think, about 10 or 12 years ago, would be something like a quartz hairspring. And somebody was doing it. I saw something, but I've never heard anything else about it. And the reason, the pendulum rods I use are fused silica, pure quartz. The reason for that is that they have the lowest temperature coefficient of any material available today. And that's one of the big problems, is temperature expansion. And it's hard, I think, and watches have gone a long way to do that. I'm still more comfortable with more modern balances, but not the latest versions of them. I'm not comfortable with high beat trains. I don't like them. I'm quite comfortable. 18,000 beats per hour, 19,800 is sort of my limit, because I think it's actually proved itself much better. And another thing that comes with higher trains, you need more teeth on the wheel. Abraham Louis Breguet said, never pass up an opportunity to use large teeth, because small teeth get stuff in them and stop.
I think Melody had a question.
I was just curious about with the miniature carriage clock.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering were you curious as to why your client wanted the clock to be that small and the insistence on making it as small as possible?
Well, he's a carriage clock collector, and he wanted a true miniature. And the miniatures that piece is 25 millimeters tall, right? And the next piece is, and a carriage clock is defined as 2 plates with a platform and balance on top. There have been smaller pieces made that have watch movements round watch movements set into them, or another special movement but they're vertical rather than horizontal. And he particularly wanted a small piece. He set it under 30 millimeter, 1.25 inches. And And I came up with that, and it was only afterwards we realized from another carriage clock collector I know, and he said, that's actually probably the smallest carriage clock ever made. And that wasn't rewarding to hear, but it's not what I set out to do, and I'm not sure it's what he wanted either, but he just wanted something, I think the Chris wanted as small as possible. And it's interesting, I could have fitted that movement into a watch quite easy, but it was actually much more difficult to fit it into a carriage clock because of its size. Because in a watch, the movement will be laid out in a circle. On this, everything had to be linear, so you needed space to be able to do that, as well as the platform and balance on top.
So, thank you as well. This was an incredible lecture, and I've been following your work for years. I've always found it impressive, and to have the chance to visit with you in person is pretty astounding. And maybe the most astounding is how much credit you give to the folks that you collaborate with. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit more information about the case that was made for the double pendulum clock, if this was something that was of your manufacture, or if you had worked with somebody on that case.
Okay. The case is that I can chop wood, but I'm not real good at doing anything else with it. And there's a guy in Santa Barbara, David Sims, made the case for me. And his work is excellent. And I went to someone, said, so you should go see this guy. So I went and saw him, and he came in, and he had a piece he'd made which had superb marquetry inlay in it, in the Queen Anne style. And I looked at it, there was no gaps, there was no pieces missing. It was so well done. I thought, this guy really knows what he's doing. Now, one of the things I did with the watches, when it came to, this is made by David Sims, which I'm showing you now, I wanted a watch box that was not a regular watch box. Remember, I wanted to offer something else. Some of my clients, I said, we've got all these watch boxes, they're so big, how can I store the darn thing? I can't throw them out, but where can I put them? And I'm sure you've all had the same thing. And then the boxes, I wanted something that represented, was simple. And so I came up with this idea, based on a pencil case from school. And so it opens up, and when you close it, no magnets, it's just well made. And David made this, and when you look at this, you'll see the grain flows right through the piece of wood. It's American white oak. And that was something important. I had to use an American wood. And I've got my name's engraved on there for the white, and a simple method in here for just latching the watch in place and putting it away. And I have another box here. It's been opened thousands of times, and it still does that. And that is so satisfying, and the join is really good, and it's just so nicely made. So David does this, and I asked him once, he was making something else, how come you're being rough with this thing? I think it was perhaps an office desk he was making. He said, because this client is a good client, he said, he'll be throwing this out in 5 years to get another one. So why should I put a lot of work into it? Okay, so, but I like doing your clocks because I know they're going to be around in a couple of 100 years, and so I put fine joinery in it. And the pieces he made for me are superb. All the joins are right, the doors hang right, finishing on it is really superb, the inlay is really good. And I asked him about the clock in particular, about the flame mahogany, and I said, no, that's not good enough. He said, I can get better mahogany. I said, okay, so what about the price? I don't care about the price, get it right. But you should know that clock that was in one of those earlier photographs, the case alone was $30,000, right? And so it's not cheap. So when someone tells me, oh God, a gold case on a watch, you mean it cost about $3,000? And they think this wood, it's cheap. And it's not. The timber itself is a fortune. Sheets of veneer are expensive, and especially when you get premium things. So, but a really good case. And the owner who got it, I'd sent it over to him, packed it up, and I said, please don't open the crate before I get there. Right? And this guy is actually quite interesting. He had it packed in his garage in there, next to George Daniels' Bentley. And he said, you've opened the crate, haven't you? And I kind of just get paranoid about it because I pack it separately. And he said, yeah, I couldn't wait. I opened it. And he said, it's gorgeous. I love it. I'm happy. Happy is good. Happy is really good. sure, there was a slide I was looking for but couldn't find. I have a screenshot of, now the clocks are not in a vacuum. If we're in a vacuum, we'd be at the next magnitude of order in accuracy. So, and I had the double pendulum running. I have magnetic pickups on it. Now, some people say magnetic pickups on a pendulum. It means you've got a magnet. This magnetism is as bad for a pendulum as it is for a watch. And I said, yes, but my pendulum's a fused silica. Magnetism doesn't matter. So the reason I use a magnetic pickup is it's more sensitive and accurate than using an acoustic or an optical infrared pickup. So I have one pickup on each pendulum, and I have the monitor, as you've seen, onto my computer interface so I can see what's happening. And I have a screenshot there of there, and in those microsecond windows, there's a thing that says average error. And one of them, the average error is 0.01 second per year. Right, now, it kept that rate up for 3 days, and not in a vacuum, and at that point it wasn't even in a case. So it was subject to drafts walking past. Now, of course, in California, I can't keep that up because earthquakes upset it. And even if I can keep it up, the next thing, the barometric pressure is a problem, but in truth, the barometric pressure changes less than an inch a year in California from the worst weather to the finest. It's not the same pressures that are exhibited in Europe where the barometric pressure can change 3 or 4 inches in a couple of hours. And the other thing is, of course, with this is the moon. Assuming I get that right, the next thing will happen was the effect of the moon on the Earth. Now, the clocks I make, and I hadn't mentioned, but in the W5 and that, they're adjusted for gravity values. Right now, gravity does not go straight down. We all think it does. And the entire North America has been paid. There's a US government office, US GeoDC or something, which is the geodesic space. So the entire North America has been surveyed for gravity values. An example, my astronomer friend who helped me do it, because I didn't understand what it was, you need your elevation and latitude. And we want to put the clock here. Okay, so sure you want it there, not there. And why? Because it's different. So he measured that where we want. You go onto the survey, you put in the parameters, and it will tell you what the gravity values is, and the length of the pendulum can be adjusted in construction to allow for that. Now, I'm at something like 365 feet. He's in Santa Barbara, and he's 70 feet above sea level. So he went home and did the same thing, 1.25 seconds day in gravity values, just from that. Now, if you're in Colorado, Mile High, it's even less because the gravity values are, is higher. You're away from the core of the Earth, so the gravity value is less. Interesting thing is not all, it doesn't remain the same. In wintertime, when it rains, the soil is damp, and gravity travels faster through wet soil than it does through dry soil. So that changes it. And of course, the next thing from that is, as the moon comes around and has full moon, it lifts up high tide. Not only is it high tide, but it moves the mass of the oceans towards the land, which changes gravity value. But as it does that, it also raises the water table, which changes gravity values. Now, the first clock that was ever able to measure this was short number 32, I think, which is in the US Navy office in Virginia. There's 3 of them. And it was from, I think, 1924 until about 1956. It was the standard timekeeper for US Standard Time. Now it's out of Colorado, based on a diffusion atom. But that was the first mechanical clock that could actually measure that. And so this, I believe, could do it. And I'm tempted to make, and of course the clock has lots of complications on it. And each complication drains energy from what you're trying to do. So I'm sort of trying to figure out a way I can make a double pendulum clock with no bells and whistles, just the 2 clocks and 2 escapements to see what performance we can really get out of it. And then for fun, if we could, maybe we'll put it in a vacuum. Except working with vacuum is not the same as everything else. It's the whole world now changes. You can't use normal oil. Oil that we use in the watches, it has air in it. Well, when you make a vacuum, you're going to lose the air. So there are special oils for vacuum, working in vacuum, but you can't apply them too early or they get tainted. So there's no way is a simple thing to do. So even the watchmaker's regulator that I made, that I'm not sure, I think Tim told me, I think after a year it was 32 seconds out. But again, it's on a building that's a metal stud frame in California, subject to earthquakes and wind and everything. Building quality is not that great for a high precision clock. But even despite that, and of course it's on an outside wall, I mean it's inside the building, but it's on an outside wall, and that means it gets temperature variations as well. So it's just insult to injury. There's a whole level of complexities that's hard to imagine. And I mean, high precision clocks are really interesting and really fun. And there's a world out there that's just not understood.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question up here? Bob?
Have you spent time looking at the Martin Burgess clock and his attempts to prove that Harrison was smarter even than we think?
I haven't seen it. I've seen the photographs and the videos. I think that's an excellent example of thinking out of the box. And yes, it's Harrison's things, but it's not really, to me, a Harrison as such. But it's excellent timekeeping. He's done very, very well with it. I guess it possibly could be improved further, but I'm not sure how. But and this is one of the, someone asked me, would I like to do something like that? And I think, you know, he's done such a good job. Let's just leave that to him. You know, I think that's a terrific thing. And somewhere maybe it's in reinventing the wheel, and I don't need to do that. And if anyone wants to ask him, he knows about it. He doesn't have to relearn everything. But it's an excellent clock.
All right, let's give David another hand. Before we wrap up, there's one thing I just want to reiterate that was up on the slides. 14 double pendulum resonance clocks built in history. I mean, compare that to wristwatch complications, tourbillons, all these. 14 of these clocks in history. David's made 5 of them. That's pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. All right, so next month, the last lecture of the year, we have a lecture by Evan Hilgeman. He's a mechanical engineer at the NASA JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also in Southern California. And he's going to, you can probably guess what he's going to be talking about. He's going to be talking about timekeeping in outer space. So this is going to be a fun one. Make sure to mark this on your calendar. This is actually the second Monday in December. It's not our usual first Monday. So Monday, December 9th, we'll see everyone there. Have a great night. Thanks for coming out, everyone.